Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Ryan Pronzinski of Christ Lutheran Church in Michigan Center, Michigan, and this is my Chair Chats Daily Devotion for Saturday, June 13th, 2020. Peace be with you. These Chair Chats, these devotions are intended to help you engage your life of faith during these hard times. With the two big things right now being the pandemic and a lot of the civil unrest around racial injustice in not just our country, but in the world. I'm hoping that specifically today's video will help you think about how your life of faith reflects that. But on a whole, these videos are intended to just help you engage your life of faith during these hard times. And so with engagement in mind, I encourage you to take time throughout these videos to reflect, pause the video, journal, have conversation with those around you, or do whatever it is you need to do to really dig into these texts and the thoughts that I raise, so you can think about what it means to be a person of faith, a follower of Jesus Christ in these hard times. With engagement in mind, I also encourage you to leave constructive comments, questions, or prayer requests in the comments section below this video, and I promise that I will get to those in the following videos. Before I get to the readings themselves, I just want to let you know that the readings that are selected each day come from the Daily Revised Common Lectionary, which is a church calendar reading schedule, and it can be found online. Today's readings are from Psalm 131. For details, please see the video from June 11th, as I will not be reading or discussing that today. Also, we have Isaiah chapter 31, verses 1 through 9, and Luke chapter 11, verses 14 through 23. All of those readings can be found in the description below. Before I begin the first reading, I just want to invite everyone out there who's watching these videos to come and join us for Sunday morning worship at Christ Lutheran Church via our live stream on our Facebook page. We stream our services at 9:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we would love to have you. If you can't join us for the live stream, all the videos are recorded and posted immediately thereafter and can be viewed on our Facebook page as well. The link to those videos is in the description below, so please come and worship with us, hear the good news, leave some comments if you do come to the live stream for prayer requests and such, and just be a part of worship with us. Thanks. All right, so on to the first reading, which comes from Isaiah chapter 31, verses 1 through 9. Alas, for those who go down to Egypt for help and who rely on horses, who trust in chariots because they are many, and in horsemen because they are very strong, but do not look to the Holy One of Israel or consult the Lord. Again, alas, that is woe to those who trust in these things. Yet he too is wise and brings disaster. He does not call back his words, but will rise against the house of evildoers and against the helpers of those who work iniquity. The Egyptians are human and not God. Their horses are flesh and not spirit. When the Lord stretches out his hand, the helper will stumble, and the one helped will fall, and they will all perish together. That is, those who rely on the horses and the chariots and people instead of God. Both those that are doing the relying and those that are doing the helpful will both fall. For thus the Lord said to me, as a lion or a young lion growls over its prey, and when a band of shepherds is called out against it, is not terrified by their shouting or daunted by their noise, so the Lord of hosts will come down to fight upon Mount Zion and upon its hill. So even if the armies are really big, like a big scary lion, or rather the other way around, like a shepherd shouting at lions to get away from the flock, God's like, I'm not going to be intimidated. Or like birds hovering overhead. So the Lord of hosts will protect Jerusalem. He will protect and deliver it. He will spare and rescue it. Turn back to him whom you have deeply betrayed, O people of Israel. For on that day all of you shall throw away your idols of silver and idols of gold, which your hands have sinfully made for you. Then, as you turn back, the Assyrian shall fall by a sword, not of mortals, and a sword not of humans shall devour him. He shall flee from the sword, and his young men shall be put to forced labor. His rocks shall pass away in terror, and his officers desert the standard in panic, says the Lord, whose fire is in Zion, and whose furnace is in Jerusalem. All right, so it may not be clear for me reading that, especially if you're listening, that basically what Isaiah is saying on behalf of God to the people of Israel is like, look, stop trusting a ally, not even a friend, just somebody who's willing to buddy up with you to fight the Assyrians like Egypt because they have lots of horses and chariots and soldiers. Like, that's not going to save you. Only trusting God and doing what God would have you do will save you. And even if their armies do look big and scary, and you think to yourself, God could surely never stand up against such an army. God's like, nah, man, like, no way, I got this. The only way the Assyrians, or your enemy, Israel, is going to be defeated is by me, God, period. That's what's going on here, which shouldn't sound strange if you've been keeping up with these videos, because that's been, the theme of Isaiah, right? So first Assyria, then Babylon, then Persia. God says, trust me and I'll see you through. All right, but what makes this reading interesting today, and in today's public conversations going on and what's going on in our society, is this. We are currently having many discussions or protests or debates, depending upon where you're at and who you're listening to, about how much we should invest in our own sources of human might. Right? There's a lot of conversation around that. And that includes the police. How much do we really invest into these structures in our society? We too have various communities afraid of very different things. Right? Just like the people in Isaiah today, they're afraid of Assyria and any foreign power harming them, and have different fears as well, not just that. And so we too are afraid of different things, be it racial injustice, crime, or violence. And it's easy for some, if not many, to think that just because our collective show of force looks big and scary, be it a police force or a military force, or really any other show of force, that if we have this big show of force, that somehow we will automatically be safer. It's how many people kind of think by default. If we're big and strong, then we're automatically safe. But we are reminded by Isaiah today that our true safety and our true freedom, because that's the whole point of wanting to feel safe, is to be able to feel free. The point of safety is to feel free. It comes not by our reliance on our massing up our shows of force, but rather when we trust in God and seek to live as God would have us. So again, our real safety and our real freedom, which is the goal of safety, right, comes not from trusting in our own strength and shows of force, but rather when we trust in God and do what God would have us do. That's when we really experience a true sense of freedom and safety. So as you might be wondering out there what all these discussions over the role of police and military spending and military presence and police presence, etc., what all this might look like, like what does it mean to me as a person of faith as all this conversation around all this is going on? How do I put God first in my thinking and decision making and conversations that I have in talking about all this? As you're thinking about all that, what could this look like? And what's best for the well-being of our country and as human beings, and primarily, I just want to emphasize again, as people of faith, as you're thinking about all of this, all these conversations and how you fit into it, and please do think about it. Please don't be apathetic about it or indifferent about it or think it doesn't affect you because you feel safe and free, because many people don't, right? And so that's the point of the whole faith thing. Like, God calls us to love people, our neighbors, all people, especially if they don't feel safe or free. So as you think about this and how you fit into this, this is what I would encourage you to keep in mind. Keep in mind who God is, first and foremost. and the type of actions that God often promotes in the prophets. And since we're in Isaiah today, we'll look specifically at Isaiah, especially since the next reading is Luke, and Jesus' whole ministry is based on a text from Isaiah. So keep in mind who God is in the prophets, and what God's character is and what God promotes God's people like us to do. As you wonder, how do I fit into these discussions around shows of force and how we spend our money with regard to keeping people safe. So here we go. So Isaiah 58 verses 6 through 10 reads as follows. Is not this the fast that I choose, says God, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin. And by kin, that means like the community around you. Don't shut yourself off in your own little house, in your own little safe, like cloistered area and say, I'm good. No, like if you see people hurting and naked can literally mean naked, but naked can mean exposed, in danger, cover them. Don't hide from them. Then, says God through Isaiah, when you do these things, your light shall break forth like the dawn. We are all looking for a new, bright, and beautiful day, are we not? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. God, do we long for healing right now? Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. And so as we do these things, right, these are hard things to do. Wait, what? Help the poor and the homeless and the naked? I mean, sometimes these people, they might be criminals, or they might have mental illness, or, this could be scary. Right? God's like, I will be behind you. I will protect you. Right? I'm going to protect you. I'll protect you. And then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. Right? And you shall cry for help, and he will say, here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, right? The pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil. If you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light will rise in the darkness, and your gloom, and we are gloomy right now, will be like noonday. So some questions for you to think about in lieu of Isaiah and all these conversations going around on reimagining what it means to be a people of safety and freedom right now. What would it look like instead of calling the police because some, punk kid, and I shouldn't even say that, I wish I could take that back and I can't now, but some kid, right, is doing some petty theft in order to just buy some food, right? I mean, I worked on the west side of Chicago and talked with kids. They don't use the words right and wrong when they talk about what we would call criminal. They talk about survival and playing the game to not get killed. So right and wrong is not even their language. So what would it look like instead of calling the police because some petty theft was happening in order to buy food? Rather, we have a society and structure that practiced mercy first, right? And had enough funding for there to be free food always for whoever needed it. What would it look like instead of putting a homeless person in jail for loitering or public indecency, right? Because maybe their clothes are tattered and worn. That we had enough funding and resources to place anyone without a home in a warm, safe building. I think you get the point here, right? That's what God in Isaiah is talking about. And before we get to Luke, Jesus is going to say the same thing. We spend much money on shows of force in this country under the guise of safety and freedom. And that's not to say that it doesn't promote any safety or any freedom. But the reality is, for many, these shows of force are not keeping them safe or making them feel free from poverty or homelessness or mental health challenges or a whole slew of other things that they need other people to help them with other than the police or the military. And so the prophet Isaiah's words ring forth to today, asking us to reconsider how we create a safe society. How do we do that? A free society that doesn't just depend on safety coming through shows of force. Even Jesus himself said in John, right, those who live by the sword die by the sword. Put the sword away, Peter. Like, that is like the last dire thing to do. And in fact, one could even argue that Jesus doesn't support any shows of force. And that doesn't mean pacifism. That means nonviolent approaches to solving conflict, right? That's for a whole nother discussion, though. Right? So, but today, Isaiah would have us question, how do we create a safe society that doesn't just depend on shows of force, but through holistic, gracious care of the community around us, right? If people are feeling fed and like they have somewhere to go and they can get their health needs taken care of, they're more than likely not going to rely on doing erratic, possibly criminal things, right? And so Isaiah would say to us, how do we protect the people that are most vulnerable, the poor amongst us? And the promise of Isaiah is that as we work toward this new way of envisioning a safe community, a free community, a loving community, a merciful community that is built on trust in God and God's heart for the poor and most vulnerable amongst us, that it's as we live this out, the darkness of fear and racial injustice and more will be lifted. That's the promise. And I'd like to think we can believe God over our own insecurities, and we can trust that as we do this, that will be so. And my last notes for this section is a fortress, right, which is a show of force, can just as easily become a prison if the walls that are built to protect us become the walls that become our tomb and separate us from everyone else. Safety, quote unquote, can become our own enemy. We can create our own prisons and tombs. That's enough for you to think about in this text. I hope that it's thought-provoking as you think about being a person of faith out in the world, right? I mean, our faith is not an individualistic thing. It's a communal thing. All right, on to Luke 11, 14 to 23. Now he, that is Jesus, was casting out a demon that was mute. When the demon had gone out, the one who had been mute spoke, and the crowds were amazed. But some of them said, he casts out demons by Beelzebul, the ruler of the demons. Others, to test him, kept demanding from him a sign from heaven. But he knew what they were thinking, and said to them, every kingdom divided against itself becomes a desert, and house falls on house. If Satan also is divided against himself, how will this kingdom stand? For you say that I cast out demons by Beelzebul. Now if I cast out demons by Beelzebul, to whom do your exorcists cast them out? Therefore they will be your judges. But if it is by the finger of God that I cast out the demons, then the kingdom of God has come to you. When a strong man, fully armed, guards his castle, his property is safe. But when one stronger than he attacks him and overpowers him, he takes away his armor in which he trusted and divides his plunder. Whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. Here ends the reading. So I want to start by saying this. I think we often forget this because we kind of have, as Christians, sometimes this sense of Jesus being this kind of warm, cuddly figure. And in many ways, Jesus is very loving and compassionate and welcoming. But at the same time, we often forget that Jesus is a rebel. I mean, he is a rebel. And in a non-violent way. I want to stress that. he is a rebel in a nonviolent way. He spoke truth to power and was not afraid to rock the boat, right? And question power structures and societal norms that seem to be harming the most vulnerable. That's who Jesus is. That's what he did. I mean, you don't get crucified for being timid and complicit and complacent and just letting things be. I mean, he poked the bear a lot. And that includes, right, this rocking of the boat by healing those possessed by a demon in the story today and showing his own authority and power, which scared the people of the day who were in positions of authority and power, right? Like the religious leaders in the text today, who often lash out at truth speakers like Jesus, through their unfair power grabs and power plays, and seek to just discredit the truth speakers, if not take them out completely, right? So the religious leaders try and discredit Jesus for speaking the truth, and in the end, they do take him out, right? They crucify Jesus because they're afraid of Jesus taking away their power. Even though Jesus wasn't just trying to become this powerful person, he was trying to promote God's work in the world, God's kingdom that lifted up the lowly. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So I have my notes again. For the religious leaders around Jesus today are simply just trying to discredit Jesus so people will stop following him, right? And that they will get back in line, that the people will get back in line with the religious and political elite of the day, right? They just want to keep the status quo going. Don't make any structural changes. Everything is fine. If you don't think it's fine, just work harder or something or whatever. It'll be okay. And Jesus is like, nah, man, this is all messed up. They didn't like that. Right? And to this telling people to quiet down and stop following Jesus and get in line, Jesus says, you who are in positions of power now, simply try and keep people divided and scared, right? You're saying, I work on behalf of Beelzebul. Who are your people casting out demons on behalf of, right? Because one of us is either of God and the other is not. There's no other option, right? And I'm proclaiming to be working for the kingdom. So who do you work for, right? You're just trying to keep people scared and divided by bad-mouthing me, right? Even though you all try to do the same things that I'm doing, because you do it because you just simply want to keep your power. And when you try and do what I'm doing, you simply do it for your own gain. I, Jesus, am doing what I'm doing to unite people, right? To point to where God is at work in their lives, to better their lives, to give them life, to lift up the lowly, and to overturn the powerful. And I do all of this for the sake of freeing the captive, breaking the chains of the oppressed, enriching the poor, healing the sick, etc. Right? And you're like, Pastor, Jesus didn't say all these things. I know he didn't say it in this passage today, but this is a larger narrative in Luke, and he does say this to start his ministry, right? So we're going to go to that. Jesus' very first sermon and the thrust of his whole mission in the Gospel of Luke comes from a passage of Isaiah in Luke chapter 4, and I'm going to read it to you. So you can all go look this up if you'd like. And it reads like this. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. This is Jesus talking. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. So we have both in Isaiah and in Luke today this powerful reminder that our communal safety and well-being does not come simply by keeping the power structures that we have in place. If they are unrighteous and not after God's own heart and God's character, which is to take care of the most vulnerable amongst us, the poor, the homeless, the naked, the hungry, etc., then we really need to question how we continue to support these structures and what we need to do with them to make them more merciful and righteous and just and good for the most vulnerable, right? Even if that means we who may not feel vulnerable and little have to give up some of our comfort in order for others to be lifted up, that's what we need to do. So this is what I would have you ponder as we get to the end of this section. Who are the captive, quote unquote, the captive in our day that Jesus wishes to unite with him and set free? Who are those people? Who are the captive that Jesus calls us to be witness to in Acts chapter 1? Because that's the second part of Luke, right? You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and the ends of the earth, right? And that's what the disciples did. They fed the hungry. They clothed the naked, etc., 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 right? They sold off their own property to help support other people around them. You know, they had compassion. They suffered with the people around them so that all could thrive. So with all that in mind, I would argue that the captive are those oppressed by racial injustice right now, right? The black, brown, people of color communities are and have been for hundreds of years under the forces of evil and sin and racial injustice. And it is our call by our God to help them. The other people that are held captive are the homeless. How terrifying must that be to not know where you're going to lay your head at night? You are bound by fear and anxiety. Yeah, I mean, if you feel safe in your home, I mean, good for you. I do too. But there are people that they can't ever feel safe because they have no home. People that are captive are hungry. You could die. I don't know where my next meal is going to come from. They're bound by those worries. Those who are in prison. We, in the United States of America, have 4% of the world's population, but we have 25%, a quarter of the world's prison population. We are putting people in prison like it doesn't matter, right? For petty things. I was about to swear there. For petty things. We need to let the captives free. Find another way of treating people like people and not like criminals for things that aren't violent or dangerous to themselves or others, which the vast majority of people who are in prison right now, that's the case for them. They've broken parole, right? They couldn't make an appointment, so they get thrown back in prison. Recidivism is huge. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please look it up. It's insane. The other people who are held captive are those who are fleeing violence and persecution right now, like many of the refugees trying to get into our country right now. Because if they go home, they will die. And just to remind you all, Jesus, our Lord and Savior, our beloved Jesus, is a refugee, right? He and his mom and his dad, Mary and Joseph, had to go away from their home in Israel to Egypt, right? They fled their home country to go to another country so that King Herod wouldn't kill them. That's a refugee. So these are the people that Jesus is for and who Jesus calls us to be for. So I guess I would just have you, I'd end by having you ask yourself these things. Are my decisions as a follower of Jesus in voting, in how I spend my money, how I give, how I engage with my community, do they support the poor, the homeless, the hungry, the oppressed? Or do my decisions, actions, and the way I conduct myself simply reflect my desire to primarily protect myself and my comfortable way of living that I don't want to lose some of for the sake of others, right? So, which of those two, and maybe they're not completely binary, but which way do you lean in those two scenarios? Are you thinking more about others, especially the most vulnerable, or are you just primarily thinking about yourself? Because both God through Isaiah and Jesus call us to be united with Jesus and our fellow human beings who are hurting. That's Jesus' call today. We are called to feel their hurt, to make their hurt our own hurt, and to help them overcome it, even if it costs us some of our own comfort. I mean, for Pete's sake, everyone, Jesus was crucified for our sake. He didn't just give up some comfort, he gave up his whole life. And we like to claim we're followers of Jesus. Like, can you be compassionate for others too, please? Thank you. I'm not saying I'm perfect about it, but I'm trying. I'm trying. And I'd ask you to do the same for the sake of Christ and the world who needs you to be compassionate. For as Jesus says, right, and we who are followers of Christ, whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. And we want to be where Jesus is. For where Jesus is, there is abundant life. And if it's a little uncomfortable or it's certain at times, I should say, even if it is a little uncomfortable or certain at times, we still want to be where Jesus is. So God bless you in pondering all this stuff that I've just put forth today. And probably getting a little uncomfortable. God bless you in the midst of it, as you do so for the sake of Jesus and your neighbors who need you, who need your love, your compassion. And with that, I say I will talk to you Monday.